All right, well, let's open in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together. We ask that you would bless us and watch over us. We ask that you would take care of all those who are in need. We see the rising numbers around the area and around the state that the virus is definitely still with us, but we ask that you would give us comfort and peace and strength. We ask that you would bless those who are currently suffering from the virus, that you would give them health and strength. And we thank you so much for the healthcare providers that are caring for them. We ask that you would bless Shirley and continue to strengthen her and help her and comfort her, give her peace, help her to know how much you love her. We ask that you would heal her and strengthen her. We thank you so much for the love. We know that you are with us in this story of Ruth, that we know that you are with even those who seem to be the least and the lost, and the people who seem to be to feel like they might be not loved by you, but you really do love us, that you are really with us. And we ask that you would help us to continue to trust that Jesus is with us. And we ask that you would bless us and help us to love others and care for others, those of us who are able to. Please help us to be like Boaz and be a person of integrity and generosity and kindness and goodness. We ask that you would be with us in our time this study. Please watch over us and continue to strengthen our faith. We pray this in Jesus' holy name. Amen. All right, so we started getting into chapter 3 last week, and I told you that we would get into chapter 3 a little bit more. However, I want to start by going back to chapter 2 for a little bit, because there's a few things I just really want to highlight as we get into chapter 3 that are important and helpful to look at. And the first one is, as we look at and we've already touched on it a little bit, but is how God seems to be working through chance. God is working by chance. So almost kind of hidden behind the scenes. So if you look at chapter 2 real quick. Chapter 2, verse 2, at the beginning, when Ruth is saying, hey, I'm going to go out into the fields, I'm going to glean in the fields. It says, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor. So that's a statement of hope. So she's hoping to go out into the field, and she's hoping to find favor by somebody, some landowner, some farmer. So she's going out saying, okay, we got to do something. We're two widowed women who have no help, no economic prosperity, so we got to do something. I'm going to go out and start gleaning, and I hope that the field that I'm going into is going to be the field of someone who's generous, nice, good, kind, those things. So there's a sense of hope. And then in verse, as verse 2 continues there, it says, Naomi said to her, go, my daughter. Verse 3 says, she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech, and that's the deceased father-in-law of Ruth. So she came into this field. Oh, it just happens to be Boaz's field. And that word, it literally says there in verse 3, it says she happened to come to a part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was apparently a distant relative. Now, Ruth doesn't know this, and we're going to see she doesn't know that Boaz is a relative yet. She doesn't know until the end of chapter 2 when Naomi tells her that Boaz is a relative, but she doesn't know that. She just happens to come into this field that belongs to a relative. And it just so happens that this relative, this man named Boaz, is a man of integrity. So verse 4 then says, and it kind of keeps on continuing this. Verse 4 it opens with, Behold, Boaz came from Beth. So he just happened to come out into the field at that time. So he might have, he's the landowner, but he could have just stayed at home all day doing business stuff at home, but he just happens to come out into the field that day. And then he goes on to ask his supervisor, kind of the foreman of the harvest project, he asks him, who's this woman? So all these things are just kind of happening. So it seems like God is just working through chance, and all these things just happen, but we know that throughout this story that it's actually God's activity. God's working through these seemingly chance events. So that's one thing that to think about, and you guys might have your own instances in your life that you look back and you say, wow, that just happened, but really that was God working in your, one of the things I think about is, and I've said, over the years, is my family moved from the town of Rantoul down by Champaign when I was about 12. Well, we just happened to move to Pontiac, where I just happened to meet Jacinda, and we just happened to be attracted to each other, and we, so all these things that you look back and it's like, well, all these random events, but God used those random events to bring you into a place. So God does it. It seems in the moment to be this random, but we see God's hand working through all that. So that's something that's happening. Also, and we've already talked about it a little bit, but Ruth is, she's a foreigner. She's a Moabite, and the Moabites were enemies of the Israelites. But she's also very low on the social status. So she's a widow, and that's partly low on the economic scale because she doesn't have a husband who would be a landowner or things like that. But she's also, so now she's a widow, she's a foreign widow, and she's still young. There's a couple words here that hint at how young she is. Now, she probably, generally the custom was once a girl was able to start having children, physically, biologically speaking, then generally the family would find a partner for them, a husband. So she could have been 15, 16 when she got married. So, and then the story says that she, in chapter 1, says she was married for about 10 years before her own husband died. And so she's probably in her mid to late 20s. So she's probably still a very young enough that she could still have plenty of childbearing years ahead of her. And so, chapter 2, verse 5, it says, Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, the supervisor, whose young woman is this? That Hebrew word is specifically saying, whose young servant is this? Whose young woman? Who does she belong to? What man, what family does she belong to? Specifically that she's a young person. Verse 13, chapter 2, verse 13 says, then Ruth said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant. Well, that word in Hebrew is actually maid servant. So you're young, it's another word that means kind of your young servant, your maid servant. Kind of the idea would be if, I don't know if you've ever seen shows where kind of Victorian era where the lady of the house has her young maid servant or something like that. So it's another term kind of denoting that she's a young, lowly servant. Chapter 3, verse 9, you just look on the next page, Boaz says to Ruth, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your maid servant, your handmaid, your servant. So again, it's kind of this young person with a low social standing. She's constantly saying, I'm a servant, I'm your maid servant, I'm this young person. So all that's just kind of to set up that Ruth is on the low level of social status of even among the servants, even among the people that are out there harvesting, like the workers. She's on the low level of all of this. And Boaz, in contrast, if you look at chapter 2, verse 1, So go back to verse 1 there. It says, this is kind of setting it up for us. The narrator's telling us what's kind of giving us a clue of what's going to happen. It says, now Naomi had a relative of her husband, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. So it's setting up that Boaz is a family member, a distant relative. But it's also this term, this phrase, a worthy man, could be used in several different ways. It could mean someone who is a mighty warrior, a mighty man of strength. So other places it might refer to like Samson or Gideon, those guys who were victorious in battle. David might be a mighty man of strength, a worthy man. But Boaz in this story never does any kind of military work, so it probably could refer to more of like a man of substance, like a man of wealth. So we know that he's a landowner. He's got a lot of servants, got a big field to harvest, and all those types of things. So he's probably very well off economically, and even a leader in the community. It could mean also that he's a person of noble character. So it's kind of a word that could mean several different things, and we see that in the story, we'll see that he is definitely a wealthy person, and he's definitely a person of social standing. Later on in chapter 3 and 4, we'll see that. He also is going to show in chapter 2 that he's a very virtuous, generous man of character. So you see, God is kind of just working in the background, bringing this person of low status and bringing together this person of high status. And I've tried to do many times, is I always try to connect it to Christ. It's very easy to see the connection of we have this low status, and this person of high status, shows his generosity to us. Jesus, the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, showing his generosity to us. So there's a lot of different things happening, but I wanted to really highlight that. Another thing that I wanted to do before we moved into chapter 3 too much is that Ruth doesn't know about this. As I mentioned, Ruth doesn't know about the relation. She just knows that she's happened to come into the field of this very good man. She's not thinking ahead to marriage yet. Now, we know that eventually they do get married, but she's not thinking that way yet. So she's just thinking, wow, I've come into a place where I can stay here. I can provide for Naomi. I have a place that's going to be relatively safe, and this guy has been incredibly generous to me. So she's not thinking that way yet. So we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves yet. The last thing, another piece of it is that there's incredible generosity. So Boaz is kind of being used as this figure to show God's love for us, but also how God expects us as his people to act. And one of the things is he's protector. Is that kind of O or protector? Is it O? So he's protector, he's a provider, he is also incredibly generous.
He's got it all.
Yeah. So you think about we've talked a little bit about the idea of gleaning and what that meant to, so if you think about a combine in a field, instead of the combine going right up to the corner of a field and then backing up and then maneuvering and getting all of the stuff right in the corner, the idea would be, to use our modern farming, you just go up to the corner and just cut the corner and keep going, and then you just leave the corner. It would be essentially what the Israelites were supposed to do. So as they were going through, they'd grab a bunch of wheat and they'd cut it, and as they get to the corner of the field, they'd just, grab a bunch of wheat, cut it. Oh, you missed some in the corner there, just leave it, and people could come. Or if kind of on the edges, if you were grabbing wheat and then you would hold it, and then you'd cut it with the fork, the big, I guess, scythe is what's the word I'm thinking of? Like the thing that the Grim Reaper always. Sickle, yeah. So you kind of have the, you grab the grain, and then you take the sickle, and if you missed any outside of that, maybe just leave it. That kind of thing. Or if some happen to fall, as you're grabbing it up and kind of bundling up, if some happen to fall, you just leave it on the ground. Well, Boaz goes way above and beyond this. Goes way, way beyond that. Go to chapter 2, verse 16 real quick. So Boaz is now, they had lunch. Ruth gets up. He just gave her a ton of food at lunchtime, first of all. He let her come and eat with them. He even gave her some of their food. So there's just incredible generosity already happening. And then as she gets up to leave and continue to work in the fields, he says to his young man, the young men supervising the harvest, he says, let her glean, verse 15, let her glean among the sheaves. Do not reproach her. So she doesn't have to sit on the corners and the edges. She can come right up next to the big bundles of the sheaves, the big bundles of grain, and anything that's fallen around there. He says, you can let her walk right up and pick anything up. Don't worry about, just let her walk among you guys. Then he says in verse 16, and also pull out some from the bundle. So if you're bundling up the grain, literally take a handful. If you got a huge bundle, instead of, as you're wrapping it up and getting it, and you're going to leave it out there to go and get later on in the day, take a handful out of there and just drop it on the ground. Just leave it for her. And said, leave it for her to glean and do not rebuke her. I mean, so this is going way above and beyond. So this incredible generosity from Boaz. And in verse 17, it says that she gleaned in the field until the evening. So she worked all day long. And then she took what she had gathered and she beat it out, and she found that she had an ephah, which is, they don't know exactly what they mean. Last time I shared, it's probably 3/4 of a bushel, 30 to 50 pounds worth of grain is what she's taking home. 30 to 50 pounds worth of barley grain is she's taking home. So Boaz has been incredibly, he's going to protect her, he's going to provide for her, and he's going to be incredibly generous to her. So that's what's going on, a lot of that stuff. I just really wanted to focus on that because last week we focused on a couple other different themes there. So that part I wanted to cover. Also, think about in terms of a story. So like I mentioned at the beginning, she hoped that she would find a field where someone would just show her favor, let her glean, and not bother her. She happened to come across the field of Boaz, and what happens at the end? Go to verse 17 and 18. Verse 17 and 18, I just read, she came away with this huge 30 to 50 pounds worth of barley that she took home. In verse 18, she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law was so shocked, said, "Where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So Naomi has no clue that she was in her relative's field. Naomi doesn't know yet. And she's just like, What where did you get all this? Whose field were you in? This is amazing, So we see things changing from chapter 1, where everything was dark and bitter. Naomi came back to Bethlehem. She was bitter. We see things dramatically changing, and God using this normal guy, this landowner, this farmer, to change someone's life. So things are radically changing for them. There's new hope in verse 20, in chapter 2, verse 20. Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." That term, the living or the dead, she's saying, on one, he's being incredibly generous to us who are still alive, but also Boaz is being incredibly generous to his relative's family. So he's showing his love for his deceased relatives, but also God. There's kind of a double meaning there. God is also being incredibly faithful. God is showing kindness to both the living and the dead. So we have hope. There is hope for us. There is a glimmer of a future for us. So she's starting to kind of change her heart. Her heart is starting to change, and you also see a glimpse of faith. There's a kind of this change that she's starting to believe that God is not against her. God is actually with her and for her. So, and how does God do that? He uses people. He uses other people, normal people in normal everyday life, to give people hope, to give people a future. So, all right. One thing, and she mentions it a couple times. I want to before we get into it really in depth, I want to. Any thoughts or any questions on that? You guys have any things you're thinking of, or anything you want me to clarify, or anything it makes you think of? No. All right. So the next thing is the idea of a redeemer. In Hebrew, it's this word goel. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the redeemer would be the person that would marry Ruth, that would marry and take care of her. It is more of the sense that the extended family, someone would at least help them out. So but this story did is a lot of people think that a redeemer was the person, like an extended relative was supposed to marry this widow, Ruth. That a lot of people don't realize that idea comes from Ruth, that, oh, look what Boaz did for Ruth, so that means that, well, the extended relative was supposed to do. Not really what was supposed to happen. If you go back to Leviticus or Deuteronomy, where it talks about a deceased brother, or a brother of a deceased man, coming in and providing for that deceased man's family by having a child through his wife, and now the brother, then it becomes the brother's child. That was, in as you guys have looked at in the story of Tamar, that was for immediate family. It doesn't give the sense in Deuteronomy chapter 25 is a place that you could look if you wanted to look more into it. It's called levirate marriage. And the Israelite practice was that specifically immediate family who were part of like the same, I guess, complex. So in my family, I have 3 brothers. So if I died, my brother, not necessarily my cousin or my second cousin down. So it's not necessarily about marriage per se yet. What Naomi is going to do is say, okay, it's my job as your mother-in-law to take care of you. So I'm going to work out a scheme. She's going to start scheming to get them together. But it's not necessarily, she's just saying, wow, right now it seems like, wow, we have someone, an extended family person who's going to care for us and be our redeemer in the sense of providing for us and watching over us and protecting us. So at least we have some hope there. So it's not necessarily specifically about marriage. Verse 23, kind of the end of the chapter, verse 23, it says, so Ruth kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning unto the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and she lived with their mother-in-law. So at the end of chapter 2, it seems like, oh, wow, we got a good thing going. Okay, we're these 2 widows. We're going to live together, kind of settle into a new routine. We've moved back to Bethlehem. We've found a place where Ruth's going to be safe and she's going to be well taken care of in terms of food and the basic necessities. So they've settled into a routine, and that probably took 6 to 7 weeks. The harvest would take 6, 7, 8 weeks, depending on rain, things just like here. But they would be out, and then it would last from April until June. So the harvest was from April till June. That's in that area of the world. They more of a dry and wet season rather than a summer, winter type of thing. So coming up into June, late May, early June, and that's what chapter 3 is going to get into. As we kind of finish off, one of the things, if you read through chapter 2 again, one of the things that is really important to think about is that work is good. I mean, Ruth is this incredibly hardworking person who goes out there and works hard, and she's blessed with a return. Boaz is a hard worker, but also work wherever, whether it's out in the field, is a place. Even work is a place where we can demonstrate faithfulness, and we can demonstrate kindness and generosity. Let's say to show faithfulness. So, I mean, you think about Boaz is just going out harvesting, and as he's at work harvesting, he shows incredible faithfulness to God by being generous to Ruth. And so you have this this kindness overflowing from Boaz. You have this generosity. You have this goodness from this virtuous man, and that changes someone's life. So even in our workplaces, when we show generosity, or wherever we go, but especially in our workplaces, if we're kind to other people, if we're generous to other people, whether it's our coworkers, our boss, it doesn't matter if we're the boss, especially if we're the boss, if we show generosity and kindness, that could actually go a long way to showing God's goodness to them too. So God's using us in our workplaces, in the places that we live, the places that we go, to show His kindness for others and to show His goodness to others. So it changes our daily lives to say church is not the only place where we show our faithfulness to God. That our daily lives, we can do things and show God's love and faithfulness that He's given to us. We can show that to others, whether we're at work, whether we're at home, whether we go to the restaurants or whatever we do, that when we go out there and we're good and we're virtuous and we're kind and we're generous, we're showing others the goodness that God has already given us. So work is a place to demonstrate faithfulness to God and God's will. Also, generosity with because you think about it, this is Boaz's land. This is Boaz's, he can take it all. He doesn't have to do any of these things. And we oftentimes get this mentality, well, it's mine because I've earned it. And Boaz is showing that, yes, we should work hard, and we do earn these things. And he takes it home. He takes home, he harvests, and he takes it in and does the normal stuff. But he shows that we can also be incredibly generous, and that God sees that, and God blesses that. That's how God works, but also that's how He expects us to work. So it's not ours, it's God's. It's the gifts that God has given to us, and we should be generous and bless others with that. So just wanted to kind of highlight a few of those things before we really get into chapter 3, because I didn't really highlight those last couple weeks. So. All right, so we're kind of settling in at the end of chapter 2 into normal life. Ruth and Naomi are there. And now, moving into chapter 3, Naomi starts to scheme. So I'll read the first 5 verses there. It says, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say, I will do." Now, she's kind of taking the role. Don't want to read too much into this. Sometimes the Bible, you can, got to be careful. Just, what does it actually say? But you think about it, Naomi's kind of playing a little bit of a game in a couple different ways. She seems to be sincerely wanting to find a husband for Ruth, and that would be her job as her new mother, because Ruth has left her mother and father back in Moab and she clung to Naomi. So Naomi seems to want to provide her a new family, a husband. But it also seems like she's kind of scheming to like, okay, I want, to be sure that my future is okay too. So if I find somebody for her, that means I'm going to be okay too. So she's looking out for herself too, here, but also her own, her deceased husband's property and stuff like that. So she's kind of scheming to take care of all of that here. She says a couple rhetorical questions. Should I not seek rest for you? Should I not take care of you? Of course, yeah, okay, that's my job. Or verse 2, is not Boaz our relative with whose young women you were? She knows that. It's like, oh, look, Boaz is the single guy, and you've been out in his field, and he's shown incredible generosity towards you. Maybe he could be this person that redeems us, and in more than just helping us out by being generous. Maybe he could redeem us and give us a new family. So she's kind of got the wheels are spinning here. And she says, see, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. So like I said, this would probably be late May, early June, so it's going to get into the hotter months, the dry months. And what would generally happen is, I showed you that video where it was, the hill, there's lots of hills around Bethlehem, and there's lots of rocks around there and stuff like that. What they would do is find a place, for us, the best place to use as an example would be Legion Lake Hill. So they'd find an elevated place that's a little bit higher than everything else around it, rather than down in a valley. It'd be up on a hill, and hopefully it would have a nice flat, hard rock surface. And it would be considered public land that everybody would use. So they would come to this place, and they would kind of toss up, as we mentioned last week, they would toss up the grain, the wheat or the barley, and the heads of grain would fall back down, and the dust, the chaff, would blow away in the wind. You'd want a nice, easy. You wouldn't want a huge wind like we've had lately here, but you would want a nice, easy breeze to kind of get that dust flying away. And so this was a place where a lot of people would come and do this. And so Naomi's saying, hey, go out to that place. You know where it's at. You know where they're going to be at. Go out to that place, and as you're out there, be sneaky about it. When everybody else is sleeping, go up to Boaz. Watch where he lays down. So maybe be out there, kind of looking, watching, seeing where he goes to sleep at. But after he's filled up his belly, after he's had enough to drink, go out there and lay next to him. And she got all dolled up, she got cleaned up, and she put on her nicest clothes, whatever the nicest clothes were. And it even says that anoint yourself. It probably means olive oil with some perfume, some type of aroma in it. So she got as nice as she could, and she went out there and she laid next to Boaz. And she's saying, then see what he does. See what happens. So, verse 6. So she went down to the threshing floor, Ruth did, and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. So what was probably happening is all the guys who were out there working, they probably were laying next to their pile of grain in order to protect it, whatever theirs was, so that, nobody would come by in the middle of the night, steal their stuff, or take off, like fill up a bag real quick and then take off. So he's laying there, in a sense, protecting his stuff, his grain, his harvest. And so it says that in verse 7, then Ruth came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." Now, he's already done this. He's already done this in many ways, and been more than generous. So he doesn't have to do anything more. So this is a very provocative statement, especially, it's still hard for people to think about women, even now, making marriage proposals. Even in, lots of things have changed for us in our culture, but even now, people still think men should be the one to make the marriage proposal, So just think about how shocking that would have been, like, excuse me? What are you asking me? So she's essentially making him, be my redeemer, not just, be nice to me, even though you've been very nice to me. I want you to be the one that redeems me personally in a very intimate way. Be my husband. So it's a marriage proposal. And so verse 9, he said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman." So this was the other reason why this was a big risk, is he could have taken advantage of her. If we didn't already know that he was a good person, and maybe he was doing nice things for her, but now he's been out in the field and he's had a merry old night and he's laid down and he sees this woman. I'm going to take advantage of her. Or, she threw herself at me, so maybe it's not even necessarily that he's going to do it in a brutal way of taking advantage. He's just going to, oh, she's here, I'll sleep with her, and then tomorrow I'll just forget about her, a little one-night stand type of thing. He's not going to do that. So she's put herself really far out there, really risky here. And he responds in an incredibly, incredibly gracious way by saying, you could have had... And maybe not. We don't know that exactly, but according to him, he says everybody knows how good you are, how virtuous of a woman you are. So, and you're a young woman still, so you could have had lots of other men. You didn't go after them; you came after me. And we don't know why. The story never gives us any clue as to why Boaz still is single. But he does appear to be an older man. He does appear to be much older. He calls her daughter a couple times. Yeah, even here. And that's obviously, it's not his daughter, obviously, not biological. It's just a way of saying, just think about maybe if when you were younger, people will, call you, like an older man or older woman, call you darling or something like that, that type of stuff. Where it still kind of feels weird every once in a while. I'll go into a restaurant and somebody will call me like, oh, hello there, dear, or something like that. It's almost this kind of like term of endearment as someone who's younger. Like an older person gives to someone who's younger, like, oh, so that's really what he's doing when he uses that term. But it still shows you that he is older than her and sees her as this younger person who is, wow, why would you want to be with me, this older guy? So he's even saying that and showing that he's kind of surprised that this young woman wants to be with him. But and it doesn't seem, and he seems to be saying too that, look, you knew how wealthy I was. In terms of, I'm a landowner and I've been generous to you, but it doesn't seem like that's why you're coming after me. It doesn't seem like you're coming after me because you just want to have my money or my power or whatever it is. It seems you're coming after me because, just like before, he says, this last kindness, this newest kindness is greater than the first, meaning you've shown all this kindness to Naomi. You've proven that you're a woman of virtue. You've proven that you're a woman of kindness and goodness. And so I know that you're not coming here just to, maybe, yes, you may want to marry me for the provision that I can provide, the protection I can provide for you. But it seems like you're doing this out of the goodness of your heart, also for Naomi. So he's saying that you seem to be doing this from a heart of goodness and virtue rather than trying to find someone that can be her sugar daddy or whatever, use some of those terms. So that's what Boaz is just seems to be shocked by this. Why would you want me? Verse 12. And now it is true, this Boaz is continuing his statement, his speech to her. Now it is true that I am a redeemer. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain here tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, fine, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until morning. So he's not going to. Let's read on the next page. Finish up reading at least chapter 3, and then next week we'll still dig into some of the stuff of chapter 3. So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before anyone could recognize another. So before the sun came up and got really bright, she took off so that no one would know that she was there, sleeping right there by Boaz. And Boaz said to her, "Let it not be known that the woman came to this threshing floor." And he said, "Bring your garment, the garment you are wearing, and hold it out." And so she held it out, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. So I don't know exactly how much that is, but again, he again sent her away blessed. He says, "I'm sending you away, but I'm not going to leave you empty-handed. It's kind of like almost a down payment of what he's going to do next. Saying, here, have this gift, and I'm going to continue to take care of you now. So he sends her away with this barley, put it on her. Then she went into the city, and when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" And she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law." So it's almost like a way of Boaz saying, "Hey, Naomi, I know what you're doing. Don't go back. Here's the proof to Naomi that I'm going to take care of you guys," both Ruth and Naomi. Then Naomi replied in verse 18, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." So you go back and then to the beginning of chapter 3. It says, Naomi, the mother-in-law of Ruth, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you?" And then you look at the very end. Last verse, she says, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." So Naomi starts the chapter, "I'm going to find rest for you." And at the end of the chapter, she says, Boaz is not going to rest until he makes sure that you are taken care of. So we see how it, again, there's God using normal, even devious means to bring these, kind of scheming plans by Naomi to bring together Boaz and Ruth. And we'll see big picture. We'll eventually get back into the big picture stuff of this is the family where God's chosen Messiah is going to come from. Both David first and then eventually Jesus. So God is using these kind of devious, scheming plans of Naomi to bring about his plan. So Ruth just happened to go into his field. She hoped that she would just find some place safe to glean. And now, all of a sudden, at the end of chapter 3, she has this man who is that will not rest until he figures out who is going to take care of her. If it's that guy, fine. But if he won't do it, I will do it. So he's not going to rest until she is taken care of, she and Naomi are taken care of. So things have dramatically changed from the end of chapter 1 to the end of chapter 3. All right, so any questions? We've got a few minutes left, but I want to end there for now. And then, like I said, we'll get into some more details, and then if we get through that all next week, we'll get into chapter 4. But want to give you a chance to add any thoughts or ask any questions. Anything that has stood out to you in these last few weeks, learning about Ruth?
It's a story of twists and turns.
Oh.
It's very much like our life.
Yeah.
So, very relatable
Oh.
to our life. I think. Only if we can see it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's going on and we're oblivious to it.
Well, I think that's a good point too, though, is that as I've mentioned, that it seems like it was just random chance. Naomi and Ruth don't necessarily see it either. Naomi kind of does. She says, "Well, blessed is he. Bless the Lord, bless him." All that. So she's seems to kind of be wondering, is God involved in this? But even in chapter 3, she's the one that takes the bull by the horns, and she's the one that makes things happen. So she does seem to be kind of shifting, and there's a sense that she has new hope, new faith in God, but at the same time, she's going to make it. She's going to take the initiative. And so yeah, sometimes I think in life, it is hard for us to see, even though these random, until later on. And I don't mean that simplistically in terms of like, I don't really like it when people say, oh, God's got a plan. God's got a plan. I do believe that God's got a plan, but a lot of times when people say that, it's, like, oh, someone just lost a husband, let's say like Naomi, a widow. Oh, God's got a plan. I don't care about God's plan. I want my husband. And also God's plan is not necessarily to just make things easy and make things nice. For example, like I don't know if I've shared here, but in a sermon at previous congregation, I talked about how my dad's dad died of skin cancer when my dad was 15. And so his mom moved them. After a while, they moved back to Illinois. So they're up in Wisconsin, and that's where he was born, and that's where he grew up, and it was up in Wisconsin. They moved back to Illinois, where she was from, where she grew up, and she ended up meeting a widower, and they got married, and so they blended family. She had 5 boys. He had 2, a daughter and a son, and so this blended family of 7 kids. But if my dad's dad hadn't have died, then they wouldn't have moved back. If they hadn't have moved back to Illinois, they wouldn't have met my mom. He wouldn't have met my mom and her family who were there. She was a year younger than my dad in high school, so they wouldn't have met. So that means I wouldn't have been around. And like I've said already, if we hadn't have moved from Rantoul to Pontiac, I wouldn't have met Jacinda, and then our kids wouldn't have been around. So it's not necessarily simplistic, but you just look back and you say, look at all the things that God did. Out of the midst of that tragedy, out of the midst of that horrible thing of losing a father, a young father, look what God did. And so, yes, God's got a plan, and it's not necessarily the one that we want, but more so is that God's going to be faithful. And that's hard to see in the moment, is God's faithfulness. It's not necessarily God's plan, like, okay, it's going to work out, so everything's going to be hunky-dory. Everything's going to be nice and comfortable. No, that's not what God promises. God does promise to be faithful. And you look back and say, wow, look at how God has been faithful. And that's what I see in my own family particularly. But that's why it's hard sometimes to see in the moment, just like Ruth and Naomi. They might not have even seen it in the moment. But so where is God in this? In these seemingly chance, random events, and then you look back and see, wow, God has been faithful. So yeah, sometimes it's hard to see.
Naomi thought that she was scheming
Yeah.
to make the plan.
Yeah.
I mean, instead of just allowing God to do the
Yeah.
plan. She felt like she had to scheme. I don't know.
Well, yeah, and also too, it's very, like she said, it's my job as your mother, as your essentially adopted mother, because you've left your mother and clung to me. So it's my job, and so I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to do what I think I can, what little I have to do. I'm going to scheme and try to, and she's not doing this out of nowhere. Boaz has already shown incredible generosity, incredible kindness. So he's saying, maybe if we push him a little bit, because it's been, so she started gleaning at the beginning of the harvest. It says in chapter 2, or at the end of chapter 1, it says that they arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Well, now we're at the end. That's been almost 2 months. And Boaz showed incredible kindness that first day that Ruth was out in the field, but then did nothing in terms of advancing towards Ruth, personally. So Boaz might have just been content. Maybe he wanted to. We don't know. We don't really know what was going on in his heart and his mind. But he also could have made an advance. So after 2 months, Naomi's kind of like, all right, he hasn't made a move yet. Let's make the move for him. So she's going to push the envelope here, and she's going to push the agenda, and so and that's her job. So she's the mother. She's supposed to find someone for her daughter, and so she's in that kind of quote unquote ordinary way. God's going to take care of her, and
We all want the best for our children.
yep. We want to take care of our kids. So. All right, so any other thoughts or any other things that you guys? All right.
Your life is old sometimes, or if you're not 20, let's say, when you're my age, that you can see the faithfulness sprinkled all throughout your life,
Oh.
and why the twists and turns and stuff like that has happened to you. That maybe each of our own plans, you can just see it more unfolding throughout your life. Where when you're young, it's hard to even know that it would happen.
And I think too, that's something that we don't do enough of is, we talk about Thanksgiving. What are we thankful for? Maybe we think back of this year. What are we thankful for? Stuff like that. But that's part of faith in the life of faith, is to step back from this moment and to step back and say, okay, there's more happening than just this moment. This moment seems difficult. This moment seems bad, horrible. But if I step back and I say, okay, but look at how God has been faithful through all of it. That is part of, I like, there's a pastor theologian named Eugene Peterson. He's famous because he did a translation of the Bible called The Message. I'm not a huge fan of that particular version of the Bible, but he does have, a lot of his other books are really, really good. And he gives this analogy. Think about a computer that has data. Like say you're inputting data, you're a data inputter to a computer program, and you only have 5 sets of data. Well, in those 5 sets of data, like 2020, everybody's focused on 2020 is this data point. 2020 is really bad. Well, yeah, compared to 2019, 2020 seems really bad. But if you step back and you look at 2020 versus 1929, when the Great Depression, if you look at it compared to the Dust Bowl years, if you look at it compared to World War II, if you look at it compared to even the crisis on the farms back in the 70s, a huge recession and lots of farms were being sold in the 70s and stuff like that. You look at all these data points and you get more data. Then you even go back farther and you think about Jesus and God's faithfulness to the Israelites and all the church. The church is all over the world. And, we think, oh, what's going to happen to our church right now? It's like, the church has been around for 2,000 years, So once we get more data. So his analogy is just to say, sometimes we need more data. Sometimes we need more information than just this right here. Sometimes we need to step back and say, what's God doing? What's going on here? And maybe we need to step back even outside of our own lives and say, my life might be really bad, but what is God doing in this person's life, or what is God doing in that person's, or in our lives rather than just my life? And so we need more data. We need more information. We need all this information to say, what's God doing? What's God up to? And how has God been faithful to us? I think about 1884 to 1984. So we're in 2024, we'll be at the 140th anniversary of this congregation. 140 years this church has been here in Flanagan. It's going to take a lot more than 2020 to get rid of us. God is going to be faithful. So we have more to look back on and say, look at how God's been faithful through all of that stuff that I already mentioned. So God has been faithful. So we need more information than just what's happening right now. So
When something happens in your life and it's really awful, you just have to remember that this too shall pass.
Yeah. And God is with you in it. God has not abandoned you. God has not abandoned us, even in those dark times. And that's what the cross is about, is that even in suffering, even in pain, even in death, that God has not abandoned us. He's never going to abandon us.
He's with us always.
Yep.
When I sent you that article that was in the
Mhm.
Lutheran, when I thought I was going to drown when I was trying to
Oh.
save that guy. And then when I stood in front of all those kids, I said, when you think, I was young then, and now I have kids. I know that God had a plan. I didn't know the plan then.
Oh.
The plan was my friends. My friends were the most important thing, but they weren't the most important thing because in that moment, my friend was sitting on the chair. She wasn't even paying
Oh.
attention. There's people all around, lifeguards the whole way around. And the only one that was supposed to save us was me.
Oh.
And it was a good story for the kids to know that when you're 16, you don't know about being a parent. You don't know about what your kids are going to do. You don't know where your job is going to be, where God's going to put you. You can't see.
Oh.
It's not just about in the moment, because your life is like a process.
Oh.
You're just going to
Oh.
So sometimes you got to know that, like David said, life will go on, and God will take care of us and all of it. But to even just know that it's not about the moment.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and you made me think too that that is it's good for us to look back, but I think you're also talking about it's important to not necessarily look forward with expectation. Well, God, you have to. I am expecting you to give me this job or give me a family or whatever. But to look ahead to say that being faithful in this moment does actually matter. That even in the midst of this hard moment, even in the midst of this painful moment, that if I remain faithful, that God is remaining faithful to me, but I'm going to remain faithful to God and to the people around me. Because Ruth could have said, all right, see you, Naomi, just like Orpah did. I'm sad to leave you, but I'm going to go back to my family. You're the person in need. But she remained faithful. Not only did she remain faithful and help her and by living with her, but then she went out and started gleaning for her. And so all these acts are acts of faithfulness and devotion to Naomi. And so she's remaining faithful. And that's one of the hardest things in midst of whether it's suffering, pain, or just daily life, is to say, okay, right now I don't see the benefit of remaining faithful, but I'm going to remain faithful. I don't see I don't know what's in it for me, and you know what? There might not be anything in it for me, but I'm going to stay faithful. And we hope that we get a return. God rewards us, and just like Boaz rewards Ruth, and over and over again. But our calling as lowly servants, servants to God, for God, of God, is to remain faithful. And that's one of the hardest things. We want big change. We want elections. We want power. We want influence. And God just says, be faithful. Be faithful to me, and I'm going to be faithful to you. You be faithful to me. And that's what he's really called us to be, is faithful to each other, faithful to him, and faithful to our church, faithful to our community. And he's gonna be with us. And so that's really hard sometimes, is just being faithful. So let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the story of Ruth, and we ask that you would encourage us to be faithful. We ask that you would strengthen us, fill us with your Holy Spirit to guide us. You say one of the fruits of the Spirit is patience or long-suffering. Well, we ask that you would give us that patient endurance to be faithful, even when we don't see the reward, even when we don't see what's coming in the future. We ask that you would help us to be faithful now, whether it's in our daily lives at home, whether it's in our jobs, whether it's in our friendships, whether it's in our relationships with family and whoever it is. Help us to be faithful. We thank you so much for your faithfulness, and we know that you will always be faithful to us because of what Jesus has done for us. Help us to cling to that. Help us to trust in that you are with us no matter what happens and wherever we go. We pray this in Jesus' holy name. Amen.